to ask ourselves, is this what India needs? We have to critique ourselves and say, is the incubation the way we are doing? Is that the right method? The way government is giving out, planning their schemes, is there anything else that can be done? It is about the ecosystem. One is the strategic action plan for IKP. The third is action plan for the ecosystem. And when I say the ecosystem, it is about the policymakers, the other enablers in the ecosystem, and also scientists and entrepreneurs and startups. So what would they be doing? It's just not our strategic plan. It could be a plan for the government and recommendations for other agencies to enable a future-ready India. So thank you so much. It was great. Now I invite our keynote speaker of the day, Dr. Surinder Singh. So can we have... Thank you. Yeah. Most of you must have heard about Dr. Surinder Singh. I'm not going to read out his very elaborate CV, but what is very important is being the regulator, being the DCGI, ex-DCGI, what I have seen in Dr. Surinder Singh is his willingness to work with industry and startups in a manner that is extremely helpful for all the stakeholders. We deal largely with life sciences, sir, and in this sector, regulation is the key thing. And we felt that before we have our session on digital health, we need your inputs on the regulatory side, and we invite you, please. Do you have a presentation?
I've got a presentation.
So.
This is the forward one. Good morning to all of you. At the outset, I would like to express my profound gratitude to Madam Deepantita Chattopadhyay ji for very graciously and kindly think of me and to invite me to the forum. And I would also like to express my gratitude to Dr. Priyankana Mukherjee also, who had been constantly in touch with me. And I'm very elated and very happy to be amongst all of you who are from the industry, from the startups, from the academia. It's a pleasure and honor to be a part of this annual innovation conference. I would like to share my perspective from the regulator point of view. Because before I go to my presentation, what I observed during my tenure as a DCGI somewhere way back in 2008 to 11, when we were at the cusp of a lot of regulatory changes and the regulatory landscape in the country was changing very rapidly, and there were a lot of issues with regard to the clinical trials, how they are conducted in our country. And during that time, this is last 1 decade or so, clinical trials, initially they went for a spike, then it turned downwards because of the lot of issues being raised by the NGOs or so. So that also I'll be covering. But one issue which I always found with the startups, with the industry also, was that a lot of their time, investment, which goes into the production of or coming out with the concept of a molecule, when it comes to the regulator, what happens is there is not a clarity in understanding of the regulatory issues and norms by the industry. Even by the professionals who are enrolled by them and they come and interact with the drug controller's office, the clarity is not there because of the 2 things happen. The lot of money which has been invested, that goes waste. Secondly, time gets wasted on this. And time is money. So it's very, very important that besides this startups, they also understand the regulatory nuances. And for this, I have always been saying from all forums that there needs to be a collaboration between the industry and academia, and also a collaboration between the regulators also, that I will touch upon once I conclude my presentation. So briefly, I will tell you and share with you the experiences which we have been now seeing during especially the COVID pandemic, how our regulatory systems has geared up to basically adopt the emerging technologies. These technologies could be on the life sciences, these could be on the medical devices side, or even for the new drugs. Now, what we are basically seeing is that government is now again and again emphasizing on one component across the board, that is translation research. That countries should do translation research, that we should come out with the innovation of new medical products which can be made used for addressing the various public health problems. And this all has happened over last 4 or 5 years and spurred by the COVID pandemic. And what we have seen is that during this COVID pandemic itself, we have seen that India becoming an innovation hub also. Startups have played a very important role in it. And one area which we see where the startups are coming in a big way is a healthcare and a life sciences sector, which is very, very heartening. And these are the areas where the revolution is actually happening in the translation research. This is happening at the molecular level, genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, bioinformatics system, and imaging technologies. And these have all led, can I have the pointer in this? Center one? This one? Okay, fine. Now, these have resulted in a better understanding of the disease, spurred by the translation research and the newer medical products which are coming out of these activities because of the use of the various proteomics, metabolics, and genomics which are there. They are putting up a regulatory challenge for the regulatory system in the country. Now, these emerging technologies, which I've just enumerated, whether it is on the life sciences or in the digital technology side, they are basically affecting the new drug discovery, whether it is novel vaccines and drugs, or it is novel drug delivery system, or newer products like monoclonal antibodies, stem cell derived products, or it is gene therapeutic products. On medical devices itself, whether it is the new technologies which are there like Internet of Things, or it is artificial intelligence, augmented reality, all these are coming into the area of medical devices and they are posing regulatory challenges, whether it is, and especially with regard to point of care diagnostics and in vitro diagnostics, which we have seen during the COVID pandemic. Now, how the regulatory system is basically gearing it up, that I will share with you. Now, it's either it is a new drug or it is a medical device. Ultimately, before it gets into the market, it has to go through this process, that is a regulatory process. And there has to be a clear understanding by the technocrats and by the industry entrepreneurs about the regulatory approvals which are required. More or less, the systems are like the ones which have been existing for a long time, but one area where the major change has happened is how the clinical trials are going to be done in our country for the drugs and clinical investigation for the medical devices. Now, in this regulatory landscape, government has tried to see to it, it's up in our country in a big way. One is to talk about a robust ecosystem, which Dr. Dipantiva also basically just mentioned. Clear understanding of the regulatory pathways, that how to generate non-clinical and clinical data of safety. And this also how we intend to do it. We have got a collaboration now, MOU with IKP, so we can work very closely to help the startups, especially with both non-clinical and clinical data, so that when it is generated, it is basically goes through with the regulators without much of a problem, and these can face the scrutiny of submission and review application process and the clinical trials by the regulators. Now, the Government of India and the CDSU also, since I've been interacting with them, so what I find is that they're also seized of this opportunity which has come up, and they feel that if innovation of drugs has to happen in our country in a big way, then what we require is that series of regulatory measures need to be done both from the scientific and ethical side. This component is more now emphasized on the clinical trials because this is the one which are basically bring a lot of setback to the clinical trials in the country. And as far as the new drug approval process is concerned, now we've got a very strong systems in place in the form of new drugs and clinical trial rules 2019, which have been put in place by the government. Now, these rules have been notified in 2019, and these rules apply across the board to new drugs, investigational new drugs for human use, clinical trials, BA/B studies, and a regulation of ethics committee relating to clinical trials and BA/B study. And also, first time, biomedical health research has also been put into these regulations which have been put in place. Further, in clinical trials, drugs and rules which are there in 2019, the drug definition itself has been modified to have new novel drug delivery systems, live modified organisms, monoclonal antibody, stem cell-derived products, gene therapeutic products, and xenografts, which were not earlier included in the definition of the new drugs in our country. And these are other salient features which are there in the new drug approval process. These all are the components, whether it's ethics committee, biomedical research has come in it for the first time. Then academic clinical trial has also been elaborated very nicely in the new drug rules. And all ambiguity which was there has basically been done away with it. And also, as we were just discussing on the sidelines of today's deliberations, waiver of local clinical trial and accelerated approvals, they have also become a norm. These are all used during the COVID pandemic to give approvals for the drugs at the various levels. Now, these rules also contain a provision for basically encouraging research and development of new drugs, especially the vaccines, which we have already seen co-vaccine coming in the market within the shortest possible time. Otherwise, vaccine usually take 5 to 7 years to develop. But here we had a vaccine just within 1.5 years' time because of the accelerated regulatory process. And major components of the clinical trial regulation I'll touch upon, though the other systems, they were already in place. The first and the foremost thing is, which has been done, is that there have been now timelines laid down for giving approvals. For all these new drugs which are coming into the country for the first time and coming for the clinical trials, the approval has to be given within 90 days. But if a product is indigenously developed, this is both for imported and those which are developed in the country, but if an indigenously new drug is developed and or a vaccine is developed, the timeline has kept at 30 days. This is mainly for the imported drugs, and this is for the indigenously developed drugs that and a vaccine. The approval has to be given by the DCGI for within 30 days, and if no communication is relieved from CDSCO, this application is deemed to have been approved. So this is one of the major change which has come in the regulator side, and this has put the entire system in pressure and gears of the system so that we have the regulatory approvals in time. So this is one of the major change which has come. Now the other change which we are seeing, which is there in our rules which has come is, I'm just touching upon the major features which have got like a long-term implications, the way the drugs are or vaccines are approved in our country, and their approval is fast-tracked. And God forbid if we got a situation like pandemic coming again, this type of a system is there in place. And also it is being used for other, giving regulatory approvals for other challenges also which we face in our health sector, which I'll touch upon. Now there is this second schedule of this drug and cosmetics, drug rules which are there. Now this second schedule, it basically specifies the mechanism to expedite the development and approval. And this is one area which is of interest to us. And here, this is basically the fast-track approval is for life-threatening or serious diseases or the rare diseases, and is also to be used for giving approval for disease of special relevance to Indian scenario and unmet medical needs in our country, also for disaster, pandemic, and special defense uses. So in this, the second schedule of the rules, they specify how accelerated approval process can be done. Now the unmet medical needs have also been defined very clearly in these rules, and these have been explained that these are situations where diagnosis of disease or condition is not addressed adequately by available therapy. So this is very elaborately defined what will actually we mean by an unmet medical need and what we mean by orphan drug. Our definition is different from the definition in US or European Union, and for our country's use, orphan drug has been defined in the said rules, which means a drug intended to treat a condition which affects not more than 5 lakh persons in India. Now these are the provisions which have resulted in accelerated approval process being in place, and here the accelerated approval process, the major thing which we find is that a marketing approval can be granted when even the phase 2 clinical trial data has been submitted, which is which is a sea change, which was from the earlier norms that approval used to be given only after phase 3 clinical trial has been done. But here with the surrogate endpoint, if it is found to be satisfactory and efficacy can be demonstrated, then even on the basis of phase 2 clinical trial data like we have seen in Covaxin, the approval is granted. But in phase 4 clinical trial, additional studies have to be done as a part of post-marketing scenario, so as to basically come out with the data that substantiate that these effects which we are seeing, they are actually resulting in a clinical benefit. Now, this provision is intended to facilitate and expedite review of the drugs so that approved product can reach the therapeutic armamentarium expeditiously. And this we have seen in the Covaxin also, in the repurposing of the drugs which have been seen during the COVID pandemic, and also providing approval to the molecules which have been developed at a very short period in our country. Another provision which is of importance to the industry is that now with the payment of a fees, the industry can seek a pre-submission and post-submission meetings with the regulator to have the regulatory guidance and pathways. Like now, today morning, I was interacting with some of the startups. They got a lot of apprehension in their mind that how they should go about developing their molecule. Now, these types of queries which come in the mind of the startups, these can also be discussed before this, have the pre-submission meetings with the regulator, and after they have submitted the product, they can also have clarity with regard to post-submission. Now, these are the changes, whether accelerated approval, pre-submission, post-submission, the timelines which are there, they are the changes which have happened during the COVID pandemic, and they are going to be staying for a long time. And fortunately, the government had a foresight that they had all these incorporated into regulations which were notified in 2019. And they have been in deliberation for almost a period of almost 7-8 years before they got consolidated. Now, this is the picture which sums up everything, where a molecule would come into the market within a period of this pathway which we are seeing, regular drug approval process. For a generic drug, this period is usually anywhere, because we do reverse engineering of the drugs in our country, so the approval process can be anywhere between 36 to 48 months for any generic drug over here. But for a new drug to be coming into the market, it takes about 5 to 7 years and even longer period before it gets into the market because of the very elaborate clinical trial it has to go through. But in accelerated approval process, the marketing authorization, you see if the clinical period, trial period is once it is completed and there is a surrogate endpoint which shows satisfactory results, which we feel that it can result in clinical benefits to the subjects, then the approval is given and marketing authorization is done. But what happens is post-marketing surveillance, phase 4 becomes mandatory, and the data generated over here can either result the product being in the market or it could be withdrawn also. But here what is happening is the approval process from 5 to 7 years, it's shortened to almost 1.5 years. And this is a story which we are all very familiar with regard to COVID pandemic, various approvals which were given during this time. Now, coming to the medical devices also, here also I'll touch upon the major changes which the government has brought in to basically see that the technological breakthroughs which are happening in our country, they can all be accommodated into the new rules and regulations which are going to be being in vogue in our country. Now, government has notified the medical devices regulation rules of 2017 on 31st of January 2017. And here the first time in our country, we have got a comprehensive regulatory provisions for import, manufacture, sale and distribution of medical devices based on risk-based criteria. And these said rules became effective from 1st January 2018. And they apply whether it's for import, manufacture or clinical investigation, all the areas it is covering. And these are the various chapters. There are about 12 chapters in this, and some of these chapters are omitted, which I'll touch upon, which are the chapters which are omitted and at what level, like suppose chapter 4, 5 and chapter 7, 9, 8 and 11. 9, they are omitted in some of the regulatory provisions which have been notified by the government recently, which I'll cover in the subsequent slides. Now, this medical devices rules, they are in line with the international regulatory practices, and basically government wants that with the help of these new legislation, the rules which are there, Make in India also gets an impetus, and all the technological breakthroughs and innovations, they are basically accommodated in these rules over there. And in this, as I said, it's a risk-based classification. We've got 4 classes of the medical devices. The one class A, B, C, and D. A is of low risk. Low to moderate is class B. Moderate and high is class C, and high is class D. And what are these medical devices? Just for an example, the low-risk medical devices, these are absorbent cotton wool, surgical dressing, and alcohol swabs. Class B is low and moderate risk thermometer, BP monitoring device, and disinfectants. Class C is moderate high risk implants, hemodialysis catheter. And Class D is high risk angiographic guide wire and heart valves. So these are some of the examples which are there with regard to the various risk-based medical devices in our country. And how these are going to be regulated in our country is that import of all classes of medical devices which are there in our country, the Class C and D medical device, and the manufacture of all imports and manufacture of Class C and D would be by CDSCO. So whether it is A, B, C, D, it will be CDSCO, and C and D medical devices manufacture will be by our central regulator. Manufacture of Class A and B medical devices is to be regulated by the state licensing authority. And if there is sale and distribution of any medical device, whether it is imported into the country or it is A to D, all will be regulated by the state licensing authorities. Now, this is what it sums up for all the medical devices based on the risk-based classification. Now, all imports from A to D, they are under Central Licensing Approving Authority, that is DCGI. The manufacture of Class A and B is under State Licensing Authority. C and D is under the Central Licensing Authority. Permission to conduct clinical investigation is only by the Central Licensing Approving Authority. Sale is by State Licensing Approving Authority across the board from A to D. Then quality management system verification is by notified bodies for Class A and B. This I will touch upon subsequently. And for C and D, it remains with the Central Licensing Approving Authority. Now, there are also, it has also been laid down in these rules that what standards these medical devices they will comply with. Now, these medical devices, they are to basically comply with the standards of either BIS, that is Bureau of Indian Standards, Indian Pharmacopoeia, or those standards which are notified by the central government from time to time. And if these standards are not available, then the standards which are to be followed are those of International Organization for Standardization, that is ISO, or IEC standards, International Electro-Technical Commission standards, or other pharmacopoeia standards. And if these two are also not there, then it should conform to the validated manufacturer standards. So this has also been very clearly laid down that what should be the standards, and this will be of help to the manufacturers also, that how they should be complying with these rules and regulations. Then for import of or manufacture of any medical device, the applicant is required to submit all these documentation, whether it is the design, specification, non-clinical and clinical data with regard to safety and performance, including the regulatory status in other countries, to the CDSCO or the state licensing authority if it is required for import or manufacture. Import will be with the CDSCO, manufacturing would be with the, for A and B with state licensing authority, and C and D for CDSCO. And in case of any medical device, safety, efficacy and performance is to be evaluated by CDSCO in consultation with the subject expert committee. Now this is again a one provision which has come out over here. Prior to 2011, all approvals used to be given by DCGI and his officers as such. But in 2011, for the first time, it was decided that we should have subject expert committees. And in 2011, March, 12 subject expert committees, they were constituted for various products. Now the number has gone more than 50 because the product's complexity is so huge. And for medical devices also, it is not only DCGI who is going to evaluate, it's the subject expert committee, their views, because these people are drawn from the domain specialization in which the product is going to fall over there. Then the other provisions for these regulatory provisions for the medical devices which are there are that these devices, once their approval is given, they are to be closely monitored for their clinical safety, and the whosoever gives the application and markets these products has to submit the periodic safety update reports to CDSCO. And this is both for periodic safety update reports are both for the medical devices, and this is same practice going to be followed in the drugs also. And at present, we have in vitro diagnostics, all are under regulation, and there are 37 categories of medical devices which are notified under Drug and Cosmetics Act and rules, which are under regulation. But now this is going to change, because now the phase-wise regulation is going to come in our country. Before coming to that, also once the market authorization for the product has been given, but if there are any safety concern, and we have been listening to them also, if there are any safety concerns, then these products, they are to be withdrawn from the market by the manufacturer or the authorized agent, and they have to inform CDSCO and other competent authorities. And this responsibility is basically for the manufacturer and authorized agent to remove the product from the market as such. So all this has been very clearly laid down in the regulations. Now next is this is also a new concept which has come in our country, that is accreditation by notified bodies, and this is for A and B category of medical devices. And present we got 11 notified bodies which are registered with CDSCO. And for class A medical devices, the audit by the notified bodies is required to be done within 120 days from the grant of license by the SLA. And for class B medical device, the audit is required to be carried out prior to the grant of the manufacturing license. Now, one thing which we observe in this presentation is that our regulatory system is now talking of a defined timeline, that there is a responsibility of the system that it has to respond to the manufacturers or the stakeholders' need within a very, very specified times. And I think industry is making use of it also now. Now, this is the phase-wise regulation of the medical devices which is going to kick off in our country, and the dates have been laid down by the government and specified also. Now, the timeline for A and B medical devices, it has started in October. These have come under regulation from 1st of January from 2022, 1st of October 2022, and this is after almost 30 months of their notification in 1st of April 2020. Because whenever new rules and regulations are coming, industry has to be given time by the regulator so that they can bring about the changes at their end also, and then can adapt to the changes. Now, after 30 months of period, these A and B, they have come under the ambit of the regulatory system. Now, class D, C and D medical devices, from 1st of April 2020, 42 months period time has been given, 18 months for voluntary registration and 24 months for mandatory registration from 1st of April 2020. And now they will all come under licensing process from 1st October 2023. That is from next year, C and D will also come under regulation. So this is how the government is gearing up to regulate the medical devices in our country. And there have been recent 2 notifications by the government, that is General Statutory Rules, that is GSR. One is on 14th of October 2022, that is this month itself, and where it is specified that all class A, whether it's sterile or measurable medical devices, are under licensing regime, but non-sterile, non-measuring class A medical devices, as I was mentioning the various chapters, chapter 4, 5, 7, 8 and 9, they are exempted from these non-sterile and non-measuring, they are exempted from these regulations. And these regulations are basically with regard to import, manufacture, for clinical investigation. These are the various rules and regulations. Only thing what we find is that between 7 and between 4, 5, there is a 6 is missing, because this is with regard to labeling. So that means the labeling has to be there on these devices. So these are the regulations, regulatory systems which will not apply to the non-sterile. Then as per another notification which has been issued in September this year itself, is with regard to that new form has been introduced for the sale of medical devices instead of the earlier form of 20B and 21B, which was there in drug and cosmetic rules. So this has also got changed, that what all provisions have to be satisfied, and this is and all these new provisions, they will be keeping on coming for strengthening the regulatory system in our country, so that the quality of the product getting to the market is safe. Now, there is also a provision like for clinical trials for drugs. There is a provision for clinical investigation of medical devices, and for any new medical device which is developed in our country, clinical investigation is required to be carried out right from the pilot clinical investigation or first in human study, and data generated has to be submitted to the CDSCO. For IND medical device or investigational medical device developed and studied in a country other than in India, so if it is we are bringing into our country, pilot clinical investigation or relevant clinical study data has to be submitted along with the application. Now, these are the provisions which has to be clearly understood by the importer or by the manufacturer. Then clinical investigation on an investigational medical device shall be initiated only after approval has been obtained from ethics committee and permission has been granted by the central licensing approving authority. Then clinical trial data has to be submitted by the importer and manufacturer and is to be reviewed by CDSCO in consultation with the subject expert. So these provisions have to be kept in mind while we are basically seeking the approval from the regulator in the country. And to facilitate it, CDSCO has got now a Sugam portal where all these documents, they can be submitted online, whether it is for applications for the grant can be also be given by for manufacturing license, lower license, test license, post-approval changes, and whether it's a clinical trials, all this can be done online with the CDSCO now. And the regulatory system, as I mentioned, whether it is about new drugs or it is with regard to the medical devices, now the government basically has realized that if the startup entrepreneurs in our country, they have to be benefited, public health laboratories and even the institutions in the private sector, they have to come up in the country in a big way along with the pharmaceutical and medical devices industry. These regulatory changes which I have talked about, they have to be dynamic, and they alone will ensure that we get affordable and quality healthcare products to our population. But in all this, one thing which is again and again being emphasized by the government is that innovation is fine. But in our country, which is a developing country, we should emphasize frugal innovation so that it is affordable and it can reach the population of the country as such. And with this, I come to the end of my presentation. And what I would like to offer from this platform is that at any point of a time, any of the entrepreneurs or the industry representatives who are over here, they feel we can be of help along with the IKP. We are there to offer our services. And I was discussing with Dr. Visu also that he can jot down the issues which are basically are there on the mind of the startups, entrepreneurs who are working on biosimilars, and we can join hand with the IKP and see to it that we create some sort of a regulatory forum where we can address their issues in a very precise manner, because each entrepreneur and startup has got issues which are very specific to them. So for this, I think a hand-holding needs to be done, and we can put systems in place where we can have the regulators and the biosimilars and the medical device entrepreneurs working together to have a clarity about the regulation, the system, and what is going to be coming. Thank you very much.
I just want to see, I know we are running short of time, but this is such an important area. If we'll take 2 questions, and so, yeah, can we circulate the mic, please? I can see your hand going up, that's Dhananjay.
Yeah, I'm Dhananjay Patankar. My question for the regulator to review the application.
Lead and is the one in the forefront of it, so that will decide upon whether this is because this will depend upon case-to-case basis. The call has to be taken. The thumb rule would be where the major work is being done.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
So just a quick follow-up. Is the ownership of the IP the critical factor, or where the physical location of the work the critical factor?
You see, the first is the ownership. That is the most important thing. Sorry. And second thing is The IKP also will the knowledge creation where it is actually happening, that will also matter. So first and the foremost thing is the ownership. Ownership has to be within our country. Secondly, substantial work should be done in our country. So, and some, because see now, whether it's the biosimilars or even the new drugs also which are coming up, the molecules sometimes they have to go abroad, especially with regard to phase 1 clinical trial. Because phase 1 clinical trial scenario in our country is still not very healthy. There's still to go a long way. But if phase 2, another part of the trial is done in our country, then it will be coming indigenous slowly.
Thank you.
Is there any other question?
There's one more question.
And this is what makes you had a very specific question. That's why we want to work with Madam's AKP, so that IKP, so we can have some sort of a regulators forum itself, where all these queries, they get addressed, not in an isolated manner. It's a continuous ongoing process, and we interact, so that what happens, the startups, the entrepreneurs, they all have got a lot of clarity about the regulatory issues, and the time and resources is well utilized.
So this is about the SCC.
If you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm SVN Raju. I'm the founder director of Aparamita Innovations Private Limited. We are working on repurposing of patented drugs. So the introduction of SCC into the DCGI system or the CDSCO system is an excellent aspect. But are there any plans to have that ecosystem built into the DCGI itself? Because today it's mostly the experts have been called in for these sessions, and it's a kind of part-time or add-on job. So because of that, one, probably they're full-time to assess the documents, and second is their understanding to the regulatory nuances, like whatever provisions actually the DCGI is giving or the regulations are giving, they are not aware. Suppose there is a provision that clinical phase 1, 2 can be waived off. But as an expert, when I'm in the medical practice, what I see is any drug comes in, it has to follow 1, 2, 3. And it's not followed, hence why this application is coming into the phase 3 kind of a discussion. That's one. And second is, when we are saying that there is a scientific advisory provision given, because the DCGI is not having this full-time SCC members, when in the practical scenario, when we are trying to approach the DCGI for any scientific advisory discussion, the informal feedback comes is you put up your application, then we will process. That's where actually we are losing time, as well as when we apply and then we come to know that certain studies are not done, and then the agency or the SEC is asking this. We are losing a lot of time and money.
You see, your questions are well taken, because what happens in DCGI office also, despite these online portals and all the systems in place, the volume of work, you see, I've been at DCGI, so even during those time, 22,000 approvals would be given, which will be unheard. The number of clinical trials which happen in our country, and the number of molecules, the number of manufacturers. So one is overwhelming the workload which is there, the consciousness of the manpower also along with that. That's a one part, but that's not an excuse. What I would suggest is that all these issues which the industry is, because what is happening, these are basically pertaining at your level. It never gets to the opinion makers and the policy makers at the higher level. So these are the types of platforms where all these need to be consolidated, and these arguments have to be leveraged at a higher level so that the system also aligns. And these types of issues, they are there. I agree with you, but these can be sorted out. But these have to be brought to the notice of the opinion makers and the policy makers, who would basically then strengthen the system and see to it that these types of issues where the delays are happening, where the process are coming in the system, in the way of the entrepreneurs getting all the approvals on time or not having the clarity with regard to understanding, they can be done away with. But this is something doable. But as such, what I feel is the system is still in the process of gearing it up. All this looks very fine on the presentation side, but the key is with regard to the implementation. So who is going to leverage this see to it that these are really implemented in letter and spirit. It is for you and me. It is for you and me to see to it that this system actually works according to the timelines and the time frames which we want over there. So this we can leverage to them, and all these issues which you are raising it over here, if we bring it to their notice, the system is responsive, let me tell you. But what happens is somewhere in between, these get lost over there.
So apart from these kind of forums, what are the other ways where we can actually get in touch with the policymakers? Because that's where, unless we, as you rightly said, we will not be able to sound off these kind of issues to the policymakers, then these will be lost in the discussion.
No, you see, as an individual, even if you take it up over there, what happens, there will be isolated regulators. The best people, the best brand ambassadors for you, for all the entrepreneurs, will be the regulators themselves. So we have to engage with them, whether they are in service or outside the service.
Thank you, sir.
So it's just today's meeting is just a beginning of that journey on which we are going to embark upon. Thank you.
So I request...
Goes to ma'am only. She has brought us to this.
So what we'll do is, we'll form a forum and we will let you know, whoever wants to join. It cannot be a very large forum, but we would form a forum, and with the help of Dr. Singh as the chair, we will constitute a body so that we can actually represent to the government. Thank you so much. Yes.
See what the system, how the system works. Now, after being a DCGI and being the government director of National Institute of Biologicals, where all these biosimilar ready. We just done is, in our pharmaceutics department, the regulatory affairs department, the first thing I did was the joint regulatory system. We are becoming vice chancellors, regulators are becoming professors. So what is happening is we are bringing the very people into the system. Now the students are going to get trained in the regulatory issues. We have and one first batch of the see what, and they are industry ready. So same way we have to do other way around, that we have to see that we consolidate our issues which we want to basically bring it to the notice of the regulators. So this type of forum will help us. We have to be very optimistic, and I think this is going to be the right type of forum from where we can take it up. Thank you. Thank you. Indian regulator is not shy of only interacting with you people, they are shy of interacting with the academy also. We have invited USFDA people, they are coming to us on 1st of December and going to have interaction with us. Can we think of serious issues? We have to take this for long.
Thank you, sir, for the insightful session. I think it's just set up the mood for further discussions now. I'm Dr. Ambut Chaturvedi. I know a lot of you out here. What we're now going to do is we're going to take a deep dive into issues around digital healthcare. Digital has been the buzzword in healthcare for quite some time. And what has now happened is you started to look at gaps and challenges coming within deploying digital healthcare solutions. While we do that, there are three areas which we want to focus over the next 1.5 hours, or 90 minutes. We're going to talk about care pathways, we're going to get into health systems, and we're going to look at the role of an evidence lab. For the first discussion around care pathways, we have an awesome panel of discussants coming in. I'd like to invite Dr. Ashwin Nair. I've known you for quite some time. It's been more than a decade that we've known each other. I know him from the days when he founded Vatsalya Healthcare, which was delivering care into Tier 2 cities, and today he's the founder of Manna Wellness. He's worn multiple hats, but I think the best one I like is him authoring the entire set of books on healthcare entrepreneurship. Dr. Ashwin is going to moderate a session with three luminaries that we have. I want to now invite Dr. Sundaresh. Sir has been an inspiration for me again for more than a decade, instrumental in setting up a state-of-the-art first human cadaver lab in India in MS Ramaya, and currently the director of Sri Sathya Sai Hospital in Bangalore. I then want to call upon my very dear friend, Dr. Shivaji Chattopadhyay, Group CEO for American Oncology. He's been instrumental. He's been quite busy in COVID times, setting up 9 centers across tier 2 cities in India, and moved from emergency care to management and now to onco care, and wearing multiple hats as well. And then I want to call upon another dear friend, Devesh Verma, coming in from Social Alpha. He heads programs there. He's also the Chief Digital Officer. And Devesh comes in with a background of understanding the impact landscape, and they've kind of building certain community alliances built around redesigning care pathways. So over to you, Dr. Ashwin. Stage is yours.
Thank you. We should just call this Friends of Dr. Ambuj panel. From regulatory pathways to care pathways. Thank you, sir, for your enlightening discussion on regulatory pathways. I think the care pathways have always been something which is of interest to everybody, but it's always been a challenge to implement. So I am very delighted to have a eminent speaker panel here, Dr. Sundaresh, Mr. Devesh, and Dr. Shivaji with me. When I was thinking of my book, The Healthcare Game Changers, one of the theses I had was that the future of healthcare will be VIP square. VIP is an acronym for virtual, integrated, preventive, and personalized. I think that's the entire sort of emphasis of care pathways. And in the recent Niti Aayog report also, there were few highlights mentioned. If you have to look at the future of healthcare in India, what are the 3 or 4 things that need to happen? The first thing was around how do we complete the agenda of this unfinished public health in India, right? How do we make sure that public health reaches where it needs to reach? Second is, how do we empower citizens to take care of their own well-being, health and well-being? The third is, how do we make sure that all the systems that we have are integrated so that the care is, affordable and also systematic. And finally, integrated, so affordable and also systematic.
Change is the only constant. We need to keep changing at all points of time. So most of the population in India, which is about 70% of the population in India, have no access to proper health care. They're all in the rural areas and they don't have access to proper health care. So before we go into doing anything more, we need to understand how we are going to deliver this health care to this population in India. So this is a paper which I have found, Redesigning Care Pathways in India, which describes very aptly what is the way of doing it. And there are people who just don't bother to treat themselves because they can't afford it. And there are people who don't get treated because their caregivers are not able to spend time and money to help them get the proper kind of health care. The government contribution to this health care is just 30%. And 70% of the healthcare delivery is by private sector. And the 70% healthcare which is set up by private healthcare delivery systems is all only for those who can afford the treatment. There are not many institutions which offer free treatment or subsidized treatment to these 30% the 70% which cannot afford this treatment. So what we need to do about it is, having identified the problem, what we need to do about it is one needs to contemplate on and look at it. Number one, as the government has to increase its contribution to this health care. And then there has to be a robust public-private partnership which needs to be developed if we want this healthcare delivery to go across the country to all the people that really deserve it. The last thing is about philanthropy. Philanthropy doesn't come easily. It can be done, but it needs to be tapped into. People need to be convinced that there is a scope for philanthropy, and that is where we need to work on also. I would like to speak a few words on the healthcare systems with which I work. But I work in the Satya Sai Institute of Higher Medical Sciences at Whitefield as director, and the founding body of this is Bhagavan Satya Sai Baba. I would like to mention here that this is not a religious organization, it's a spiritual organization. And it's a service organization which has set up 5 hospitals completely free of cost, delivering advanced health care to all those who need it. There are 2 super specialty hospitals and 2 general hospitals and a mobile hospital. The mobile hospital is something which I'll talk about a little later. It's located in one in Puttaparthi and 2 at Puttaparthi, 2 at Bangalore, and the mobile hospital is also again at Puttaparthi in Andhra Pradesh. How has this worked? It's interesting to know. This has worked only on one thing, that there is a corpus which has been donated by the devotees of Baba. And that, the interest from that corpus is what is funding the entire hospital, not only the hospital, an entire education system. The university, Satya Sai Institute of Higher Learning, is also funded by this trust, which runs these institutions. And it's only by the interest which is earned by this corpus. And this is used for the revenue expenditure, and all capital expenditure comes from additional donations from these devotees. It's a very robust system which has worked from 1991, when the first hospital was inaugurated at Puttaparthi. The hospital at Puttaparthi has all these specialties, treating a lot of patients, and over 271,000 patients have been operated free of cost. And all the surgeries that are done there is with the best of equipment and the best of manpower that is available. All the doctors, most of the doctors are fully employed. Only a small percentage of the doctors are volunteers who come from within India and from various parts of the world. A similar hospital in Whitefield, which I am heading at this point of time, it has all the specialties, mainly cardiac surgeries and neurosurgery. The cardiac surgery department performs about 6 to 8 cardiac surgeries, and the neurosurgery department performs about 8 to 10 neurosurgeries. And orthopedic surgery, I am an orthopedic surgeon, I do a lot of joint replacement free of cost, which is all high cost treatments. So even this is totally free of cost to the patient. And then the general hospital at Puttaparthi. And then we have the mobile hospital. This is an interesting model which is worth looking at. There's a bus which is completely equipped with all diagnostic modalities, including an echocardiogram. It has the lab, it has an X-ray, it has an echocardiogram. And consulting doctors, about 400 of them are registered to work voluntarily with this hospital. All of them are mostly from Andhra Pradesh. They come for 12 days. If you look at the calendar of events, the van goes to a fixed point every month as the dates are suggested, and it goes on repeating itself. Therefore, the primary care delivered in these institutions is total. The only reason I'm mentioning all this is because I want to prove a point that can work. Healthcare. I think we should parallelly delve into this area of where we can get healthcare, reach out to the people who require it really. Most of the patients who are coming to the major hospitals, in either at Whitefield or at Puttaparthi, you'll be surprised to know are from either West Bengal or Orissa, where the healthcare delivery is probably not adequate. So I stop here by just saying that there is a possibility that we can do. See, looking at this example, and we need to address the fact that there is something beyond digital healthcare which we need to do, not at that we shouldn't do that, but we should look at the fundamental requirement of the patients of this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sundaresh. I think you brought out a very important point around creating access to 70% of the population.
Let's say 70% of the population lives in those areas which are hard to reach, or there are a lot of unmet needs in those areas. And if we are trying to solve a problem, and I'm going back to the whole why we should need or why should we need to focus on building care pathways which are contextualized or context appropriate, especially from an India point of view. Because if you look at the way care is provided or care is delivered, it can be looked at it from a first mile delivery or a last mile delivery, depends upon how you want to articulate it. But majority of the workforce that goes into the field, if we want to empower them with certain protocols or pathways which are distilled out of complex medical facts, which are novel, actionable and validated, I think it gives them the confidence to provide care to the beneficiary or the citizen. Typically what happens is that the ability to come to a decision in terms of identifying is not there to an extent which it should be, because they are not asked to do that, because they are not equipped with the appropriate protocols or pathways which will help them identify simple cases of, let's say, high-risk pregnancy case, or what needs to be done if you find someone with a case of acute diarrhea, or someone with a chest pain who is walked into a health and wellness center or a sub-center. I think that's where building these protocols, which are heavily contextualized from the need that India has, will help us a lot. Now, technology becomes a logical adjunct, because then it will help us in disseminating those. The idea is to build those around what India needs. So let's say if there is a case of silicosis in Rajasthan, or if I go to Bihar, Muzaffarpur, I see a case of encephalitis. Those are contextualized to specific regions in India, right? Now, if I get those protocols, build it to an extent, crowdsource it or open source it for other startups to come in and start building, let's say, decision support systems, very small rudimentary decision support systems for frontline health workers. Imagine the impact that these systems will cause. While digital or technology are the easiest things to build, the toughest part is to crack how will a user use it, right? If I go and ask an ASHA worker or an A&M or an Anganwadi worker that, hey, here's a technology system, I want you to use it. We have to look at the human behavioral aspect also, right? So build those systems which are usable, which answers the question for frontline health workers that what is in it for me? It gives them the ability to decide. It gives them the ability to confidently decide. And either it results in the right treatment or a quick referral, which does not happen frequently. So technology that way will start helping people, and then you can start adding multiple different peripheral things where startups can come in and help in capturing those medical data points, right? It could be a point of care device, it could be an IoT device, it could be a handheld device, it could be a wearable. There are multiple different avenues to collect data points. But then how do we bring it all together is by thinking of one build pathway, empower the people to start understanding why this is important and help them use it, and then leverage those technology systems to build solutions for them so that they can start using it. Is it a silver bullet? I don't know, but I think we should start looking at it. There will be challenges because technology adoption is a huge challenge, but that's how I think we should start looking at solving the problems with simplified care pathways, leveraging technology and distributing it to people.
Great. Thank you. I think you made two very interesting points. One is, how do we think of redesigning care pathways using technology but keeping the front line in mind, right? How do we empower the ASHA workers or the community health worker? That's number one. The second important point you're making is that there is enough opportunity for startups to leverage that data to then build intelligent systems which could then create personalized sort of care pathways for a large number of people. That's great. Now moving to Dr. Shivaji, I think you are in a sector which is driven by care pathways, right? Oncology is sort of the early adopter of care pathways. And now you are contextualizing that in the rural, semi-urban area. Are you seeing major shifts or changes or challenges between what is happening in the sector in general and what you are implementing on the ground?
So, thank you, Dr. Ashwin. See, I'm a person who understands both the side of the table. Being an intensivist myself and being a management, seeing how care pathways have evolved in developed countries, whether in Harvard, where we have a polytrauma patient or a really sick patient coming in, which goes into a critical care setup. If if that data is streamlined, if that data is properly analyzed by clinicians, correct, I think care pathways can be possible in each and every disease. It's possible. In single specialties has happened, only in multi-specialty, certain plant cases already it's there, correct? And I feel, coming directly from the industry, a person of operations management in healthcare, I would always support a care pathway. We follow it in oncology. I had implemented it across my company, correct? We don't deviate a single bit. In many of multi-specialties where we have worked, we created something known as a basket concept. If we have a robust care pathways, we can predict how much consumable is required for each and every patient. How many syringe, needles, everything can be predicted out, correct? So we have done that, yes. We need some sort of support from EMR developers. Some of the EMRs are quite exhaustive. As sir rightly pointed out, the end user, I prefer, it's easy to convince an ASHA worker to use a care path, but it's very difficult to convince clinicians like us to follow a care path, correct? So if we can have simple decision support tools, which many of the EMRs are inbuilt, I think we are reaching there. So that's my opinion.
Great, thank you. Again, you touched upon one very sensitive topic, which is clinicians' adoption of care pathways, but also technology in general. I think that's an underlying theme across the sector. We'll come to that. And the second one, what you are saying is adoption of standardized pathways or care pathways is not only good for clinical outcomes, but also operationally for clinicians and hospitals. Coming back to Dr. Sundaresh, I think building on what Dr. Shibaji said about clinicians, I also feel that we are at a space or juncture in history in India where the health system is being transformed, whether it is Ayushman Bharat or digitalization or whatever is happening in this sector, right? Things are changing rapidly. The challenge, however, is the medical education system is still stuck in the past. Do you think that there is an opportunity now to redefine education, training of medical students to be prepared for this in the future?
Yeah, I agree with you that delivering healthcare has a direct relationship with how the medical education system works within our country, because that's the production line for the healthcare workers, essentially the doctors and nurses and other paramedical staff. Today the cost of education in our country is phenomenally high, and that could be one of the reasons why we are not able to get people to go out to the periphery to practice the art of medicine. Number two is there is a fundamental deficiency of manpower in the areas where they are really required. That is the reason why all the efforts of the government have failed in delivering the healthcare to the rural people. The government's efforts are tremendous. There is no question about it. They have set up primary health centers everywhere. In fact, a lot of primary health centers have been equipped also with a lot of high-end equipment or whatever required for that particular region. But unfortunately, there is not a doctor there or a nurse there who is willing to stay and take care of the patients in around. That is the basic problem. So therefore, the medical education system has to be used to extend these services into the rural areas. Towards that, the government's decision about starting a medical college in every district in the state is a wonderful thought, because it not only produces more doctors, I hope it doesn't create unemployment, but at least then people will go to the periphery because they don't have jobs in the cities. But at least the hospitals that are developed in these areas in district headquarters will serve a huge population in and around that area, number one. And the other problem of why this cost of medical education is high is because of the regulatory authorities. The regulatory authorities are still sitting on rules which have been made by the British for us. Unfortunately, it is not practical anymore. Sharing of resource is a huge problem for anybody who wants to start a medical college, who has started a medical college. They just don't allow sharing of a resource. It doesn't happen. They don't believe in somebody coming for 2 hours and 3 hours and taking a lecture and going back and doing whatever else he wants to do at that point. They need to have persons employed full-time. So all these things cost money.
Right.
There was a rule when they said we need 30 acres of land to start a medical college. But now it has come down. So these are the issues which increase costs of medical education. So the people who qualify out of such systems naturally need to make that money.
Right.
They can't do that in the rural areas, and government can't afford to pay so much money.
Right. Thank you. One of my hypotheses is that if you have to fix healthcare, we have to stop relying on doctors, right? So, in that context, Devesh, you are focusing on building this capacity at the community level, right? So maybe if you can share, if the doctors are not willing to go to these places, how do we build capacity in the smaller towns or villages where there is this need?
I think, especially if you look at India as a country, I think that's an important aspect to look at. One of the things that we talk about in Community Science Alliance is the aspect of task shifting. How can we empower people at the last mile / first mile to take those decisions which can then help, let's say, doctors who are sitting in higher health facilities, right? Will we be able to staff every sub-center with a medical officer or a community health officer who is equipped in the clinical aspect of treatment? Well, time will tell. We don't know. We're still trying to figure out how do we build those health and wellness centers, right? But I think it's important to look at how do we do the task shifting ability, train those people, give them enough in terms of training enabled by technology, and of course, yes, pathways also, which will at least give us the ability to stop the migration which happens, which also goes back to what Dr. Sundaresh cited, which is the out-of-pocket expense. One, at a village level, people don't tend to move out because health is not a priority, diseases. And whenever they move out, they go to places where they spend a lot of money because the peripheral centers are not working. So equipping those through pathways, through technology will help us solve that problem. We may not be able to have one doctor, the ratio will come down, but we still, because we are 1.4 billion, we are not a small country. So we'll always lag in terms of qualified doctors vis-a-vis the ratio of patients. But I think that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, I think, if you look at when we were hit by COVID, right, and I'm going back to pathways and the medical education bit, I think it's important to also look at what was happening. And I, not being a doctor, I just am citing as an example that the type of treatment lines were different. And I think the doctors will agree that because there were no set protocols, right, people were either thronging to higher health facilities because the peripheral centers were not treating them because they did not know, right? And the patients were being given a lot of things like ivermectin, I forget the name of the drug, but you know what I'm, steroids, because nobody knew what was hydroxychloroquine, because the pathways are not set. Now, if we go back to the medical college, not going into how to set that up, but looking primarily from when a medical student gets out of the college, if we build these pathways to an extent that they become ingrained in the medical education, so that when they get out and go do rural medical postings, they will be able to start using this and this will become part of their psyche. they will start using these pathways which will be standardized across India. So that, especially from a primary care point of view, we are going to solve one big problem, which is the disparity of treatment. Because if the pathways are structured and evangelized and given to every medical institute, the students will start using that structured approach. So that will solve a lot of problem also, right? But now going back to the primary care bit, it all goes back to task shifting. How do we look at enabling those frontline health workers, medical officers at a PHC or a CHC, giving them enough in terms of understanding of clinical pathways, simplifying it, and giving them the ability to decide, giving them the confidence that this is okay for you to read, learn and decide and do the line of treatment. And then save a lot of lives at that level, not having them migrate or go to a higher health facility, lose a lot of time. Not only just for pandemics that hit, but also smaller things, like I said, high-risk pregnancy cases, chest pain cases, or diarrheal deaths that happen, anemia cases that happen, which result into high-risk pregnancies, right? So I think that's one way to look at it.
Great, thank you. I know we are short of time, so I'll wrap up with one more question. But if you have audience has some questions, please do ask before we wrap up this session. If you have some mics here, we can circulate. While that is happening, Dr. Shivaji, one of the challenges that you mentioned is adoption by clinicians, but also to think about as we go about redesigning this, what role does...
See, it's a debatable point which you raised, Dr. Ashwin. Now, I'll just say a few words what Mr. Devesh said. See, we were trainers. I think care pathways, if we now have a very robust program of rural posting, correct? I feel when these people are getting inducted, it's a one-day session, because PHCs usually handle close to around 10-15 major diseases or minor diseases, which is more or less prevalent across the country. It's very easy to induct clinicians with a care pathway. Now, in super specialties, yes, we could do that, because one of the major things which I have seen is in healthcare, we induct clinicians. If we have a proper induction of clinicians, and in that, if we have care pathway inbuilt, it's very easy, because care pathways releases a lot of time of the clinicians himself also, which people don't understand, because it has a flow, it has the entire line which a patient should follow, it has bylines if a patient is deviating, if these are the... So it's very easy. It's only about the intentions. And what I personally feel, since Ayushman Bharat, Ashwin, you brought out, slowly care pathways will by force come into place. Bharat, Ashwin, you brought out, slowly care pathways will by force come like data. They have certain protocols so protocol is somewhat a step down or a glorified form of care path, correct? Only we call them care path, and protocols is just a synonym to it, correct? So I still feel that when we are inducting or when the people are joining, whether it's public or private, if as CEOs or people from private sector, if we spend one day time with a clinician, make them understand, because technicality they all agree, if we can spend time, showcase that how a care path will benefit you rather than the patient, I think it is possible to implement. The other side of it is, yes, we need to do a lot of work on developing care pathways, because care pathways is very dynamic. It is not static. In some of the disease it might be static, but as clinicians we have our subgroups in all our IMAs. We have physician associations, surgeons associations, correct? If we make them active, I think we can develop a more robust, more precise, more predictable care pathways. Because what I feel in care path, we talk about cost, we talk about resource freeing up, but many of the care pathways are still unpredictable. So there are a lot of uncertainty still built in, because we don't keep on evolving the care path. So this is my suggestion.
Great. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, can we get one microphone here, please?
fabulous discussion. Thank you so much for all of your comments. My name is Anunay. I represent Jepaigo. One quick point that we've heard as a retort, maybe not exactly against care pathways, but as a counterpoint to it, is are we being too linear in our approach? You can get to care pathways and then we suddenly start talking about precision medicine, both from a patient perspective and also precision medicine from a community perspective, precision public health from that perspective. And so what is your take on that? Or should we really be going down the care pathway route, or and given now the Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission and everything that we're talking about, putting a patient and an individual at the center of care itself, is it fundamentally then beneficial for us to start going beyond it and going down towards cohort-based care and precision medicine in itself?
So, see, what you used as a precision care, correct? This, I feel, is also a part of the care path, correct? So, we have protocols. When we document it, we make it into a paper, more structured flow diagram. We create a care path. Ultimately, what is care path doing is what you absolutely said. The outcome of it would be very thorough precision care. That's why I said in my talk that we are not evolving. We are creating one care path and remaining static. Care path cannot be static. A lot of factors has to come in. We have to discuss and we keep on evolving, and that's how we reach to precision care. And precision care is slowly moving. It's there in every specialty now. People are moving into precision care, and if we don't have care paths, correct, we can't reach precision care. How much technology you bring in, there has to be a usage pattern. I always call care path inbuilt with usage pattern, whether it's a drug, whether it's new innovation, whether it's technology. The more we use it in a structured way, the more precision care will come in. So these are all three interlinked, I suppose. We start with protocols, move into care path, we keep on evolving the care path as new dimensions are coming into our observation, and then we ultimately reach into precision care. Now, precision care is also not static, it's dynamic, because we have seen it that there is no base known as precision care. It's moving slowly into that last 6 sigma mile where very less error is there. So these three are all linear.
Great. Thank you very much. With that, I want to thank the panelists, Dr. Sundaresh. Unfortunately, I think we are running out of time, so maybe we can have a one-on-one conversation. Just to summarize, I think for me the key takeaways were, one is how do we redefine care pathways by focusing on medical education and training, number one. Number two is how do we leverage technology to focus on empowering the last mile or the frontline workers where care pathways might be more relevant or more appropriate. And finally, adopting good care pathways is really the way to push affordability and access. And finally, the point that you made out, which is what is care pathway? Is it leading us to a linear sort of approach? My sense is that care pathways have been led by clinical protocols. In the future, there will be a component of the patient themselves playing a part, right? And the families playing a part. So I think it will be a combination of clinical pathways, then patient-led pathways, and maybe some community element as well. Because I think, after all, health is a social subject, right? So with that, thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you all for patient hearing.
Thank you so much. And my takeaway on this entire session was, if you're looking at care pathways, they need to be inclusive, which is that they need to have multiple stakeholders coming in. Second thing is we have we'll probably have to rush into the next session now. So here's the next one coming in. I now want to invite the moderator for the next session. This is going to be on health systems, strengthening health systems actually. And the moderator, Dr. Nirnay Jain, country digital lead for Japaigo. You already made your mark with your question, so let's see how you how you take the thing forward. And then I have the privilege to invite Dr. Krishna Reddy, currently the country director for Access Health, associated with a wealth of experiences across the healthcare system, right from being a clinician to then now getting into the entire advent of building health systems. And then, welcome once again, Sharad Sharma sir, co-founder for Rise Spirit Foundation, but for me, a mentor, specifically on when I look at digitization of healthcare. And so with this, I pass on the call to you, Dr. Nirnay. Over to you.
Yeah. Maybe we can follow COVID protocol today. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for what we're calling the fireside chat. And today happened to be a day when Delhi was below 15 degrees centigrade. And so is perhaps the right time to have a fireside chat. But again, a warm welcome to my co-panelists today, and again, a wealth of experience from them. So unlike Ambuj, what you said, it's less of a time for me to say anything, more of time for them. But let's, on this session, we're probably going to grow up a level, right? We're going to take a systems and an ecosystems view onto what can happen as the future of healthcare is concerned. And so this is going to focus on building resilience in health systems, and what does it take in order to really drive our systems towards that. Just as a very simple contextual point setting piece, I think all of this conversations has started to happen because of COVID, but health systems resilience really starts before a crisis even happens, right? So it's about building that spring which can absorb the shocks, which can recover from the shocks quickly, and which can perhaps evolve stronger. But everything starts with a little bit of introspection always, right? And so let me call upon you, Dr. Reddy. I think we've all seen how COVID's really affected us. We've seen how our healthcare system in India, healthcare systems across the world, just because of the way that the data was made available to us as to how health systems across the globe have responded to COVID. And so could you give us your views on how you think we've performed as far as COVID response is concerned? What was our resilience that came out? Or were there lessons that we can learn from other health systems that perhaps will become a guiding point for us as we go forwards towards building a stronger health system itself?
Thank you. Thanks, Nirnay. I think just as a clinician, we do the mortality meeting and morbidity meeting. So the COVID is like a system level assessment from a clinician's perspective. So I think the first assessment, if we look at from an Indian perspective or the global perspective, the three core objectives of the health systems and what are the outcomes related to that. The first outcome I think anybody sees, whether the system performed or failed, is what is the mortality? What were the excess deaths that the population had? Could these deaths be prevented? Whether any country could prevent these deaths, we have examples. So fundamentally, any health system outcome measurement is, did it prevent deaths? So that is fundamental question. I think there was a lot of debate on actually how many excess deaths that happened in India. It should not have been there. I mean, why the system is not able to measure how many deaths have happened in the country? It's not difficult. I think in a village, the serpent should know how many excess deaths have happened. So this is, I think, the fundamental to beginning of learning what happened during the COVID. So that is one aspect. The same way, we should know how many disabilities are there. That means how many patients with long COVID are there, how many patients are left with damaged kidneys, damaged lungs, and the damaged hearts are there, or damaged brain is there. Because this is the lifelong disability that has been left by the COVID. So third aspect is in they trust. Is it the private system they trust or the public system they trust? So that is the one aspect, because if the trust is not there in terms of their health needs were not met during the COVID. So that unless we understand those aspects of it, in terms of the meeting of the health needs, when I look at in terms of the access or affordability or the quality of healthcare. So the last aspect is in terms of what are the financial hardships the population faced. So how many people were pushed into poverty because of catastrophic health expense? So my take is that we begin with first finding out these outcomes as a part of our learning system. Like any proper assessment, then we go to the 4 fundamental functions of the health system. In terms of the provisioning of care, in terms of the financing of care, in terms of supplying resources for care, and in terms of the governing. Because unless we look at from a systems approach, we will not rectify this. We'll be only transactional. I mean, this worked well, so we do this worked well. Telemedicine worked well, let us do that. So I think that approach may not be correct from a complex systems perspective. The third is in terms of the structures delivering these functions and the processes. How weak are these structures? How weak are the governing structures? I mean, we always look at from the global health architecture, but we don't look at the architecture at a village level, at a municipal ward level. In fact, our looking should be starting from there. Whether it is the governance of the local system, the functions are same at a village level. How do they function the health of the village? So why don't we deaths data based on complex statistical calculations? Whereas you can have a real deaths to know what were the excess deaths and what were the cause of those excess deaths. Having said that, if we have to assess our performance around these parameters, yes, we did encounter deaths which could have been prevented. We do have disabilities which could have been prevented. We did push people into the poverty which could be prevented. But the positive side is that the tremendous resilient response of the entire system. I'm not talking about government, private care. So that is, I would say, is the most transformative step if implemented properly to leapfrog our health system, whatever gaps that we have in terms of the access, in terms of affordability, in terms of implementing the care pathways in the most efficient fashion. So I think that was one, I would say, the important policy that came out. And second policy that came out is the Ayushman Bharat infrastructure mission. That means you are addressing the structural aspect of it. The information system integrates the entire fragmented complex system, and the infrastructure mission is attempting at strengthening the infrastructure right up to the village level, including the health and wellness clinics. So I think these are, as a part of this, in fact, we have initiated the Global Learning Collaborative, that how do we systematically develop that learning health systems culture at a district level, at a village level, at a state level, at a national level, regional level, and global level, so that you don't depend upon some research studies coming from the global academic institutions. The state should have that capacity to assess their own health system, to manage these complex health systems. Yeah, these are some of my takes in terms of what would happen, but what should happen in the future for resilience build-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy. I think some very big sound bites that you just provided around how it's important to look at this from an actual systems perspective by first focusing on measurement, by making sure that you're addressing all different aspects of healthcare as to how do you really build trust, how do you really evolve not just healthcare delivery, but also perhaps financial security as a part of universal health coverage itself. But Sharad, let me quickly turn to you as well. Obviously, health systems resilience and building strong health systems isn't just about response to pandemics like COVID, right? Global research shows that there's so many other shocks that prevail across. And so, if we truly have to deliver equal care to everybody equitably at all points of time, then, are there any overall system gaps that you are seeing that as we lay out intervention targets for ourselves over the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, that we should perhaps be focused on in order to build these stronger healthcare systems? And any recommendations on upfront as to how startups and how the ecosystem should then start to look at these?
So if we look at universal health coverage, we know we are not doing very well, right? And I think you alluded to that. And I think except in some areas related to vaccination, there were a number of problems that were resurfaced. They were known, and, it wasn't as if they were not known earlier. Now we know that there are countries who can solve this if they spend $2,000, $3,000 per capita. You can look at European countries. We know also that below that there have very, very few success stories. I mean, the only one that is worth mentioning is Thailand at $700. Can we even spend $700 per capita? No, we cannot. So first, let's frame the problem. Our problem is that at $230 per capita, can we provide universal health coverage? No country has done it. Many don't attempt it because in their view, this is not even possible. So this is the first way to look at this. Now, is there a possibility that we may be able to do it? I think yes. For that, we have to go back to our own recent history. First, in the 90s, we were able to reimagine how stock trading used to happen. NSE and depositories, we take it for granted. Screen-based trading came in India first before it came in most other markets. Even today, NSE is one of, by transaction volume, the largest exchanges that are there. We have had electronic depository receipts for a long time. Then we went out and tried to fix the voting system. And by and large, we did it, except for the voters list. The fact is that our EVMs are needed elsewhere in the world. I mean, and Americans should certainly take them on. Then I think in the last 10 years, this has been the biggest revolution that is happening. So if you go to 2008, only 1 in 25 had a formal ID. You go to 2011, only 17% of the people had a bank account. In 7 years, we gave more people bank accounts than on an average. This is a BIS study. Most countries took 46 years to reach the same penetration. Today, we have managed to democratize payments in a way that nobody has thought of. We managed to do that with data. So now the benefits of that are accruing in the financial system because you can now do credit, cash flow lending in a way that was inconceivable before. So when actually COVID happened, there is this seminal meeting that took place, and I know Mr. R.S. Sharma could not be here, is that we normally vaccinate 25 million babies through our existing 40,000 vaccination centers. And it was clear that we would have to vaccinate 1 billion people. And the discussion was, do we need 20x the vaccination centers or 10x the vaccination centers? That was the conversation that was happening. An alternate point of view, which was finally adopted, was no, maybe we don't need more vaccination centers. We just need to streamline the flow of people, in money and information through the system. So the fact that we had 2 billion vaccinations in 1 year is because we could use Aadhaar, we could use DigiLocker to give everybody a certificate, and almost all vaccination centers, especially the private ones, did receive payments on time. At least nobody received, had big issues enough that they would reach the press, right? I'm not saying that it was imperfect. So the question, I think, it ended up being something that we don't appreciate, which is what ABDM is. That in any system, if you reimagine the flow of people, money and information, you can unlock productivity. In this case, since we were able to do 25 million people vaccination every week, we unlocked at least 50x productivity in the same system without training of personnel in a big way, without anything at all. So this is the opportunity that is sitting in the health system today on a larger basis. However, is this going to get us where we want? From where we are with UHC, answer is no. Many other changes that would be needed. Some of them have been alluded. For example, with respect to pathways and protocols and related to that, and we can cover that in more detail later. So the first point is that there is something we must appreciate that is happening, which is there is a streamlining that is taking place. Instead of Aadhaar, we're going to be using Aadhaar ID. Instead of DigiLocker, we're going to be using personal health records. And instead of UPI or IMPS, we're going to be using e-rupee, which is a voucher system. And the voucher system has the potential to completely transform the health system. Why? Because the leakages can be stopped, right? So when you have a mother who delivers an underweight baby, she's supposed to get protein biscuits. Only half the state she gets protein biscuits. The other staff, only the register says she gets protein biscuits. But if you give her a voucher that she can redeem in a pharmacy for protein biscuits, then you disintermediate the corruption in a very big way. So that's coming. For hospitals, the health claims exchange has already been announced. So that is coming. So revamping of plumbing is definitely going to happen. Now in this, there is embedded in this a very big idea. And this is an idea that is coming from other areas, which is often not appreciated. That look, it is going to be a combination of public technology. Public technology does not mean government technology. PHR is not, the protocol is not government protocol, it's actually a public protocol without it being a government protocol. It involves public technology and public policy. And the question is whether we'll be able to synthesize these two, like we have been able to do in the financial inclusion sector in a very meaningful fashion. Why we've been able to do it in the financial inclusion sector is because there has been a set of regulators, RBI and SEBI particularly, who have been very progressive, who've been in the regulation business for a long while. So you may have the ministry which may be taking a myopic view, but you have a regulator which takes a slightly more progressive view. That formulation does not yet exist in health. Very often our ministry is both the provider and the regulator. And we will need that reform as we go forward. So I think we will need to reimagine health as a combination of public policy and public technology. I'll come back to that a little later, if there is time. But I'll stop here and hand it back.
Yeah, sure. So let me pick up on some of the things that you just said. And one of the pieces that we will need to fix is the misaligned incentives that are there within the system as well. I know we've had an independent conversation about that, but can you elucidate a little bit more to that? Because I think that perhaps is even more germane to the entire story here than just the plumbing.
It is controversial. I mean, you can see, the best way to see this is Canada versus the US. We know US spends a lot more money and has poorer health outcomes than Canada, right? Now look at India. In India, if you were to look at $230 as the spend, we have Kerala which actually spends it within the government system. And on top of it, you can add out of pocket. So we have a state, Kerala, which has got actually enough money to get to UHC. But this is also the state that has one place where the cesarean births are 94%. In one big district of Kerala, they are 56%, right? So what is happening is more money is going in the wrong direction. People are using that money to do unnecessary cesareans. And I'm only citing that as one example. There's data to indicate there are many more things. So the result is that we have the same phenomena that is emerging, is that if you have more money, you don't see a correlation with better outcomes that you talked about. What you see is more misaligned incentives and more wastage of that money taking place with almost no material actual improvement in the health of the population that you're looking at. So this is, in India could well build a system which, as we put in more money, this becomes even progressively worse. And we have a wonderful country to look at as an example of this, and it's called the US, right? I mean, it's a paragon of misaligned incentives that work for anything and everything, to the point that they can't even preserve for the last few years their lifespan of their population, right? And look at what's happened with the opioid crisis. I mean, a completely perverse incentives at work. So if at all, I am glad you brought this up. We have to therefore look at it from what we call it as the open networks perspective. Because otherwise monopolization, rogue intermediaries are all going to come in. Now this requires a little bit of a techno-legal regulation, because you can't have just regulators saying thou shall not do it and it will stop happening. It doesn't work like that. And so therefore it requires market architecture and deep type of market policy thinking that needs to happen in India. Otherwise we will not make progress.
Great, thanks Sharad, thanks for that. Dr. Reddy, one more oft-forgotten aspect to building resilience is the human resource aspect of healthcare itself. And I know you as a person have been at the forefront of this, you're very passionate about it. But how do you build resilience within the human resources within healthcare itself? How do we really look at that aspect of healthcare provision?
Yeah, I mean, one is we need to redefine the WHO benchmarks in terms of the doctors per population or the nurses per population. In terms of adequacy of the human resource, it is the demand supply. Suppose I need a consultation of a cardiologist for an elective thing, or I need a joint replacement, I need a bypass surgery. What is the waiting list in India? It is less than 24 hours. What is the waiting list in NHS? What is the waiting list in US, where you have 4 doctors per 1,000 population? We have less than 1 doctor per 1,000 population. So we need to redefine what is the adequate number of human resources required for people's health needs in a way if it is given. For example, the previous session, there was a clear discussion in terms of if you're breaking the same functions of a doctor, or a functions of a nurse, or a functions of a front, some of those competencies, some of those things can be done by many other people. For example, for a doctor in the US, he sees 10 patients per day. I see 100 patients per day. But in terms of the medical records, I generate the same. Because once it shifts to the formal labor, automatically they come under the social insurance. So the entire architecture, I think the technology is pushing our society into becoming more formalized. So that means when you become a single pool, then you can actually drive strategic purchasing to derive value. I mean, at what cost you get the best outcome. For example, if 100 deliveries are done at this cost, why should somebody do cesarean unnecessarily? So I think we need to move towards that value creation, and it is achievable. Mind you, I mean, for the current spending of 3% or 3.5% of GDP, the volumes that we have, the output we have is much greater. If you really calculate the value of the services that we are doing, much greater. And this is at a level where 20% of the sanctioned budget is not spent every year. Then if you calculate the value of low value services or no value services, that means the drugs not needed, consultations not needed, procedures not needed. If you eliminate that, you save another 20%. We have enough money. Actually, the current money, you can give much superior outcomes. So we need to approach that systems approach to derive. I mean, I think we are in the right place. We may be like India for the world. We can become the example for the world in how you can drive efficiency, access. I mean, you have unimaginable access. Rural villages also, if they want to have access, today we have an access. I mean, if a ASHA worker is just trained to connect with them with a consultant through WhatsApp, they can consult. I mean, most of my patients, in fact, they are now consulting from the village. They don't come to me. I say, you don't come to me for 1 year. So it is possible. I think it is possible to make it as efficient and give the best value for the money. I give an example. Bypass surgery, when I started my cardiology profession 35 years back, we used to charge 1 lakh. Today, Arogyasri pays 1 lakh after 35 years. But still, we are able to do that and still survive financially. So there is a way to innovate.
No, absolutely. And Dr. Reddy, you brought a very strong point of being vocal for local, but with a global voice in many ways. But let's go a little bit more deeper down into it. And Sharad, if I can peel that layer of the 20% savings that Dr. Reddy was talking about, and further 20% of savings that could potentially arise from unnecessary procedure itself. Is it that our focus needs to start changing as well? Should we be looking at chronic care and chronic diseases that are potentially the next shock waiting to come to us? Should we be aligning ourselves perhaps with more point of care testing and more biomarker testing than with just protocols themselves? And so your thoughts on where that next level of investment should potentially go into?
So as some people have said, that the biggest disease that we have is people don't follow the regimen, right? And IKP itself, I think, did a seminal challenge grant back on TB regimen adherence. And that is universally the case, right? I mean, you people with diabetes have that problem, and people with hypertension, and and the problem is that we have these rich country problems. And our budget in the rich countries, the budgets is being taken care of by these, is being eaten up by these chronic diseases, right? So this NCD element we have to reimagine in a very big way. And if we don't reimagine that, then whatever money that we have set aside will be eaten up with that as we go forward. Now, is it possible to reimagine that? And many of us believe that the answer to that is yes. And why is that possible? Because I think we have to find a good way to nudging people. The TB Challenge grant indicated that simple solutions can lead to big outcomes. But there is also something else that has happened in the last few years. And the good example of that is TikTok. Now, TikTok we don't appreciate in India because thankfully we don't have it here. But TikTok has more minutes spent on it than Netflix has. And so now TikTok is the same system that operates in China and the same system that operates in the US. The difference is that the hand on the scale is looking for different outcomes. The hand on the scale in the US is now been proven, designed that the people in the US start hating their own country. The hand on the scale is designed in China so that they start loving their own country. That same damn system, same company, two different outcomes. It is one of the most significant A/B tests that has happened in the world. But what does that A/B test prove? It shows that it is possible to change societal thinking using the media, social media that we have. The question that is in front of us is, can we find a way to do this so that we get better adherence? Can we do it in such a way so that we have more frequent OPD visits? Because that's a key element of being able to make sure chronic care is happening well. You know, the doctors are beneficiaries, the patients are beneficiaries. Maybe that needs to happen on telemedicine, right? So that the time spent is very minimal. Maybe it requires group consultation to be possible in telemedicine so that it's actually more effective than it is possible. So I like to say there is an experiment like that that is happening as part of something called the Open Health Services Network. So clearly chronic care we have to reimagine it. We cannot import a Western system because they are broken as it is. They are the Visa, MasterCards. We have to think in terms of Paytm wallets and UPI. So we need a completely new ground-up thinking, first principles thinking, and I think that will come about here in India. That's point number one. The point number two, I think, is that we know from the Japanese experience that if you want to deal with, let's say, things like oncology, early detection makes a world of a difference. And I think because of the Moore's law that is working in point-of-care terminals, because of the data infrastructure that we are creating, which Professor Desai alluded to in his talk yesterday, you know, we are in a position to actually take an aim at early detection in a way that was inconceivable just 5 years ago. Third is that we have to go for preventive care. And in fact, culturally, we are the only country in the world where preventive care is part of the culture. I mean, we are the country that's given yoga to the world. You know, we have this mindset in our population that they embrace the idea of preventive care. So I think if we have to aim for $230 million beyond, you know, everything else, there are three big ideas. Can we reimagine chronic care? Can we bring early detection to the large population of India, and can preventive care can be amplified in a way that we cannot conceive of today? So that would be my answer.
Perfect. Thanks, Sharad, for that. Dr. Reddy, on the same topic, I think Sharad's given the 3 primary interventions that he'd like to focus on, but perhaps a couple of interventions from your end where we should start to focus our attention on as well.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk of health systems, we keep on talking of the health budget, and this is the budget percentage of the population. But the people don't look at the budgets which influence health. The budget on Swachh Bharat, the budget on Ujjwala scheme for indoor pollution, the budget on Jal Shakti for clean drinking water, the budget on clean energy, okay, the budget on communication. So I think the investment should start with the social determinants. So that should be part of, should be considered as health budget actually, not just pure on curative care budget. Normally we equate curative care as the entire healthcare budget. No. I think that is the first thing is we have to, because the longevity, if you look at longevity of the population, 72% of the longevity is on account of social determinants, not because of healthcare delivery. So budget has to be invested there, and the value for money starts from there actually. As a person, I mean, because we cannot also deny the benefits of the advancement in the technologies at a personal health level. That is where the precision medicine comes. But to make me access that advanced technology, not deny me the advanced technology, I save money by the primordial prevention at the social determinants level, then the primary prevention, then early detection. So the prevention, I think many people think prevention means only primary prevention. No, the primordial, primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary prevention. For example, if somebody has an acute MI, if I don't prevent the heart failure, okay, because heart failure once it develops, the average lifespan is 3.5 years. But if I don't treat again heart failure as per the evidence-based guidelines and emerging technology, what was 3.5 years, now I make them live around 15 years with good quality of life. So we should not deny advancement in technology, but at the same time, how do we extract money by the entire value chain and continuity of care, right up to the end of life care. I would say you plan from womb to tomb. The malnutrition of the fetus actually predisposes them to NCD in the future. Okay. So, as Sharad said, I fully agree that there is a need to reimagine, and we have to decolonize ourselves from the Western thinking. I think we can think originally. So we need to change the benchmarks. Change the benchmark of 1 doctor per 1,000. It may not be required. I mean, your doctors are for the cognitive purpose, right? Rest of the thing, data collection somebody can do, imaging lab equipment can do. Even the cognitive function of a doctor, like a dermatologist or a pathologist or a radiologist, now AI is able to do. That means one radiologist reading 10 X-rays now can read 1,000 X-rays because your processing is much faster. So your productivity is going to increase. So you have to redefine the human resource benchmarks in terms of the doctors needed per how many people.
Perfect. I think this is a great opportunity for us to bring this conversation to a close, and I could continue having this conversation for several hours with the two of you. But perhaps the most significant takeaway for me and for all of us is the need to have redefinition of sorts. Redefine not just what we measure, what we aim for, but also perhaps redefine what health is itself. Health cannot be a singular concept just constrained around service delivery and care delivery and diseases itself, but perhaps we really start to embody what One Health is, which is bringing together the concepts of climate change into healthcare, the interaction of agriculture with healthcare, the interaction with all of the other social determinants that perhaps will play a fundamental role towards us improving and making a more resilient healthcare system itself. So thank you very much, Dr. Reddy, Sharad. I appreciate the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Another excellent discussion. And for me, the entire piece actually hovered around looking at social determinants contributing to 70% of healthcare. The other piece was reimagining the entire way healthcare needs to be planned. With this, we get on to the third session. This is, so while we talked about digital technologies, there are processes and protocols where, which are needed to validate these technologies. And the need is because you need to understand whether, what kind of outcomes can you expect from solutions which are into the market. And so therefore there's a need to build processes, there's a need to build infrastructure that can deploy those processes to validate those technologies. And this is where the concept of evidence labs comes in. And when it is, for this session, I would like to invite our Chairman and CEO, Dipanta Chattopadhyay. Ma'am will be moderating this session along with our experts for this panel. I would now like to invite Professor Udaya Desai to come in, sir, Founder Director, IIT Hyderabad, and now a Plaksh Fellow. I would also like to invite Professor Sarang Dev to get onto the stage, again from ISP into the operations management field, and also associated with the Max Institute for Healthcare. And I would want to now invite Sri Madhav Joshi, CEO, India Health Fund. We've had discussions around this, but I think it will be great if you can structure the discussions. Ma'am, over to you. Okay.
Thank you, Ambuj. The previous two panels and the regulatory keynote actually paves the way to the discussion of this panel, which is about evidence labs. Especially when we are looking at digital health and healthcare solutions that are going digital, I see Dr. Surinder Singh is not here. I did not hear the voice of our regulator, CDSCO, talking about what happens for digital health, what kind of regulations will be followed for digital health. It is probably a Class A device, what he referred to, and within Class A, digital health was not actually alluded to. How do we, and all devices that would be in the digital health space would not be Class A. Some will be Class B as well. Could be Class C at times, but A and B definitely. In that case, who actually built?
Let me say two things in the beginning. Maybe they are somewhat not completely aligned. One is, I'm not a great fan of heavy regulation. I said that yesterday also, and I keep saying it all the time. Sometimes I think it is, heavy regulation is anti-innovation. But on the other hand, some degree is required. Now, having said that, I think the concept of an evidence lab for digital health is very essential. It's fantastic. Because today there are many people who are providing digital health services. To some extent, I would say, at one time I was involved with a startup called A3, remote monitoring, that is anywhere, anytime access remote monitoring technology. It started about 15 years ago. It was basically about digital health. But the point is that people are not very confident of using it. They are not sure as to what they're getting out of it. And all of us, feel very comfortable if something is certified. Wherever we go. When I buy some products, today if I buy medicines, I know it has been certified, by an agency. So I feel more confident about buying those medicines and consuming them. Even simple things like food when I buy, I know FSSAI has certified it. I feel a lot more comfortable. So I think it is, yes, essential to have it. Okay. In that sense, I think that, to me, in my mind, there is no controversy about having an evidence lab or whatever name that you kind of select for it. And digital health right now, it is kind of, it's a very loose thing. Okay, I know many people who are very active in digital health. In fact, most academic institutions contribute a lot to digital health rather than the conventional healthcare system. But what is required in evidence lab? I think what is it? You have to create trust. If I say something is good, why would someone believe me? Who am I? I could be. Just because I'm a professor at an academic institution, there is no reason. So I think one big challenge is how to create trust. Whatever it may be, good, bad. Like in US, you have the FDA, and somehow people have developed a certain amount of trust. There are pros and cons. Okay, I've heard in private people also talking that, oh, this happens, that happens, etc. But still, by and large, we feel if something is FDA approved, okay, I'm more confident of accepting that particular product. Could be a medical equipment, could be medicines itself, etc. So trust has to be created, and that is not easy. Creating trust, it's a long-time process, and a structure has to be created. You need, at least in the beginning, people who are working on it with impeccable record. There should not be any self-interest, any relationship with commercial organizations and other things. I think that is one particular part. The second part I would say is authentication. How do I authenticate whatever I've done? Earlier, yesterday I talked about collaborative kind of authentication in a way. How do I validate? Because there is an organization which says this is good. Initially in the mind being, who is this organization? Just because they are saying, should I believe it is good? How do I go about verifying it? Now, I don't have a clear answer on these things. These things require a lot more thought, but I think this would be required. The third is, I think, alluded, and I'll just leave it at that particular point, that 2 points, if you permit me. One is timeline. I won't spend time on it. Anytime, if I have a digital health product, I give it to the evidence lab, I want it in a fixed time. I think Dr. Singh talked about it a lot, so I won't say. The last part, which I'm not clear, even in Dr. Singh's talk, broadly is that suppose the evidence lab says that, yes, this is good. If something goes wrong, who's liable now? Does evidence lab does FDA have any liability tomorrow if a drug fails in the market? I'm an electrical engineer, by the way, so just to make it clear, I'm not from the medical fraternity. So I really always ask myself, in this case, when the products are defined. Same thing with standardization bodies. Standardization bodies are not liable. It's the guy who manufactures. So I leave it at that point and then come back to other things that you have. Thank you.
So I think these are very important points. You alluded to less regulation, then you talked of trust, you talked of liability, you touched upon authentication. And I think let's hear the other two panelists. Madhav, can I get your views on this?
So I'm going to start on the basic premise that healthcare works on evidence. There's no evidence, there's going to be no adoption by users or providers. So I think that's fundamental, and as we've heard previously, there's a very well-defined pathway for evidence in the conventional sense, whether it's for therapeutics, vaccines, or devices. Digital health is where it gets fuzzy. And so the question of the need for evidence, I think, is well established in all. The question is, how do you go about it? And there could be many ways. I don't think there's one straight pathway towards it. But the evidence lab, in the absence of a well-defined structure, at least provides an approach that has the potentially the alignment of all of the relevant stakeholders to at least make sure, to the point that Dr. Desai made earlier, trust is built in the right way, consistently, and with the parameters that have everybody's consensus and obviously address all of the quality checkpoints that need to be addressed. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you. Sarah, can you have your views?
Yes. I've been grappling with this question because when we think of digital health, there are so many types of interventions that we can think of. If you're thinking of a drug, then we know that more or less it's going to have a therapeutic effect. If you think of a medical device, many of them are used for monitoring or measurement. I think digital technologies, digital solutions run the whole gamut. They can be used for monitoring, they can be used to generate recommendations. Doctors can act on those recommendations, patients can themselves directly act on those recommendations and then nudge the clinicians, please do this to me because I've got this alert. So I think the space is very complicated, and as a result, the evidence that we look for will also have to be multifaceted. What kind of evidence do I want to be generated for digital solutions which are directly used by patients? Because we know that there is a digital divide, and even people who think they are digitally adept may not be able to interpret all the digital signals that come out of a solution. Doctors, there is a separate challenge of how do we convince doctors that the digital solutions are giving out the right signals or right information. So, I mean, I come from a business school, so I can't think about anything other than a 2x2 or a two-dimensional map, you know. So it would have to be, what is the intended use of a digital solution, and what are the different types of evidences that you would want for each of those uses. It may be, I mean, in drugs, again, we think about safety and efficacy, right? Is that the right framework for digital evidence? I'm not sure. For medical devices, we think about standards. Maybe we need standards for some. We need safety and efficacy for something else. And I think that's probably the important role that a lab, a digital evidence lab could play, just to lay out the framework. And we heard a lot about, you know, how not to learn from others, you know, countries. I think we could learn from other countries in this case because they are a few steps ahead and they would have made some mistakes that we should try and avoid. But I mean, we may want to discuss this later. I think a crucial element would be, how do we get the regulators to actually inculcate or incorporate digital competence? Because the way I'm interpreting this is, the lab would be maybe an independent entity, but at the end of the day, the legitimacy will come when the regulator in the country would say, yes, this makes sense. Now, it's not trivial because, I mean, I don't know those people personally, but I doubt if they are trained in digital technologies. Many of them may come from, you know, chemistry, biosciences, and this may not be natural. So how do we build that capacity so that the output from the digital labs, you know, gets used in an appropriate way? But maybe we'll talk about that.
Thanks. I think both of you, Madhav and Sarang, you touched upon very important areas. How do we make, even if we collect data, if we try to build evidence, researchers keep doing it, academic evidences are built, but how does that get legitimized as, because this is not just a research paper that we are talking of, we are collecting evidence for policy changes, or we are collecting evidence for consumer benefits, or we are collecting data so that the regulation is proper, at the right level. So the next question I have for maybe Dr. Desai, you talked of regulation. You're not a great fan of regulation. So let me ask you a question on regulation. I think that would be good. If we have to build a system, if you have to build a system, and what kind of data do you think, what would go to the regulator, and what would the regulator do with it? Because I understand your sentiment, and how do you think this can be done? And we'll come to Madhav and Sarang with two different aspects of the provider and the consumer.
So you're saying what kind of data I should give to the regulator?
Yeah, what would be that path? How will we connect to the regulator? Why will they take our data? Who are we? How does that happen?
So that one has to develop. One is a relationship with the regulator. There has to be a dialogue and communication, and the data that I provide should be valuable data. You know, I just can't give some numbers. So if I can say that this data is coming from, you know, suppose I have say oncology data, and I'm saying it's coming from Tata Memorial Hospital. We collected it in collaboration with a leading oncologist. You know, I think Badwe is in charge. I think he's still there. Okay, so in collaboration with Dr. Badwe, or maybe, you know, from Nanavati Hospital in collaboration with my good friend Nagaraj Huilgol, who's the radiation oncologist out there. Okay, so then I think the regulator is more likely. On the other hand, if I do an experiment in my lab in IIT Bombay or whatever, IIT Hyderabad, collect data and go to the regulator, I don't think the regulator is going to pay too much attention in spite of having the IIT backing. Because there has to be, in some sense, the core expertise. Okay, the people who have the core expertise have to be involved in collecting the data, also in terms of saying that yes, this is good valid data. And I've had a lot of discussions about this, not from radiologists. Patkar, I think many of the radiologists in the audience may know about it. I think he was the president also of the Indian Radiology Association. Now Patkar was very critical of a lot of things that I used to do, and even in COVID times, he said this is useless, I'll never use it. And he is a good friend, so he could openly tell me that. So I think, if I involve Patkar in collecting the data and then go and say that, yes, it is us who did as a technologist, then we have Dr. Patkar who is involved in it, I think he's likely to accept that. I would say that has to be the approach.
So, it is about collecting data along with clinicians and along with the regulator themselves to have a process so that what Sarang mentioned, so that there is a legitimacy of whatever is collected.
In fact, I would add one adjective, though people may hate me for this, is we should have both sides. People who have established a reputation, you trust them.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think otherwise, it takes time to develop a reputation. And I think so when you say, people, experts in different domains, they all should have a strong reputation.
Sure. The key opinion leaders. Fantastic. So, Madhav, as IHF, the work that you are doing, and I understand that you have an interest in an evidence-building laboratory. So, what are the aspects that you are looking at? Are you looking at long-term data collection, longitudinal data, so that the government can take actions and understand what is happening with the introduction of digital healthcare solutions? What would be your basis and your interest in doing an evidence lab?
So, India Health Fund is an initiative that was set up by Tata Trusts, particularly to focus on enabling deep science and deep tech to strengthen primary care by ensuring better access and affordability for people who need it but don't have access to the technology, and that's why it comes from the trusts. While also making sure that the digital literacy is built among regulators as well as healthcare workers who will eventually be delivering it.
Thank you. Sarang, I have a Samsung watch, that smartwatch, which tells me a lot of things about my heart rate and so on and so forth. Is that good enough to go to a doctor when there is an indication of a deviation? I'm not sure. And they always say this is not for taking decision-making device. It is just an indicator, an early indicator. The question is, I have not seen, even for an Apple Watch or a Samsung Watch, a rating, a comparator rating of these devices, that are available. As a consumer, can we do something for the consumer so that the consumer, when they use devices or digital health in any format, they feel more comfortable? What should we provide them?
Sure. I'll quickly just respond to one of the earlier comments.
Sure.
Because I really liked what Professor Desai said on the credibility of the evidence. If you have subject matter experts from different areas coming together, a technologist alone cannot generate the evidence, you need clinician. I think another element of making the data credible, legitimate is following the structures and processes that exist. For example, if you want a drug to be approved, I'm sure you have to do a clinical trial registry. It's not trivial, because for you to register that clinical trial, you have to write a protocol. You'll have to say, these are the outcomes, this is how I'm going to enroll my subjects, this is how we'll take care of attrition of subjects, so on and so forth. So if a similar framework was available for digital therapeutics or any digital solution and the researchers followed, that would be a notch above, because I agree with you, researchers' job is to generate evidence. But I don't think every piece of evidence that gets generated is going to be useful to approve a digital solution. The two are very different things. Right?
Absolutely, because there are inherent biases in any research.
Or the objective may be different. Right?
Yeah.
But yeah, coming to your point about consumers, I think, I mean, we'll have to do a survey of sorts, but I don't think a lot of these products today are bought with the intent of intervening in any care pathway. I could be wrong. I don't have watch, so I don't know much. But I think today we are just kind of saying, okay, it looks good on my wrist, or there's some fancy, things that I can tap, etc. Very maybe just 0.01% or less, maybe saying, oh, this is giving me useful health information, and I will actually use it to first make decisions on my own way, and then maybe communicate to the doctor. So yes, we do need, comparators and what are the right attributes and so on and so forth. I don't know how and when we will reach there, because while we can come up with those standards, consumers need to understand that those are relevant attributes, and doctors or clinicians need to also, agree that these are relevant. Not everything that the clinician thinks is relevant is available in the digital solution, and then the clinician has to marry what comes from the digital solution with other inputs.
Yeah.
I mean, not consumer facing, but we've been working with some AI technologies that do diagnosis of, TB was mentioned earlier, and other chest ailments by reading X-rays. And we are finding that the radiologists think that this is not, one, useful, and that they are already so good, they think, that they don't need this AI solution. And we need to generate evidence to say, what's the objective expertise versus what perceived expertise is. So I think while consumer focus is important, the providers would also have to be brought in at the same time.
Yes. So it's the provider and the consumer who comes in building. Even if we are talking of protocols, and that brings me to my last question very quickly. If you have to build a framework of collecting evidence for a world that will be increasingly digital in nature, personalized medical, so you are empowered to handle your health yourself. I think we are moving towards that. In that kind of a scenario, where do we start in terms of building protocols? Do we actually, and this is a very quick, so what is your view in terms of where do we start building our standards and frameworks? Do we actually wait for the government to do it, or do we actually start building, and where do we start building? Anybody?
I have the mic. I mean, we can, so the start would have to be, it's difficult to come up with standards. You can start by generating evidence and possibly having these discussions with, people who matter. So CDSCO may be the right place. Because eventually for a framework to be legitimate, for, procedures to be legitimate, for something to be approved, it would have to be through the regulators. Yeah, I mean, I'll stop there.
Okay. So there is no freedom from regulator. Yeah.
So I would argue that we're probably a bit far away from personalized healthcare right now. And the priority for digital solutions should probably be to ensure early screening as a means of enabling early diagnosis, treatment, and eventually prevention. So to my mind, it's really about building the approaches and framework that can enable use in primary care, low resource settings, which can then overcome both the infrastructure, the financial, as well as the manpower limitations. And that's the big advantage that digital solutions can bring as a supplement to the existing health system.
So, I don't think we need to have a complete sort of approval from the regulator. What can be done is, I'll give an analogy, not necessarily in healthcare, but electrical engineering. For example, certification. you buy cables, you buy switches. Okay. Now, there is no regulator which necessarily certifies the electrical switches. I mean, they can give you a shock, right? And you can die. Okay. Or you can get debilitated, whatever. But then there are organizations which have been recognized by government that you certify it and will accept it. In fact, IIT Bombay for a long time used to have a short circuit testing facility. And the professor who was in charge, made money. So it was not something like a philanthropy work. And industries in Bombay and perhaps all over the country, okay, used to come there to do the short circuit testing for every electrical item, maybe electrical switch or whatever electrical components were there. Okay. Now, similarly, what can be done is that if IKP sets something up, the government can say that we have trust in you, we have faith in you, so you give the certification, and we recognize that certification. Personally, I think that is a better approach than the government trying to do everything. In the process, what happens, everything gets centralized and things don't move. And I think decentralization to me also is very, very critical, and somewhere we should convince the regulators that please decentralize. There are enough private bodies also which are good bodies and can do good work and give good results.
So I think with that, this is the perfect note to end this conversation, and we will pick your brains later when we actually set up, that's what we are intending to do, evidence lab for the digital world that we are going forward to. And that brings us to the close of this session. Lunch is waiting. Thank you. But before that, we need one photograph.
Take any questions from the audience?
Actually, it's getting so
Getting too late. Everybody's hungry.
Everybody's hungry. 2 o'clock, we have another session. I have to be there. So I just took that liberty of not taking questions. Come forward.
Thank you for that, Deepak.
Yes, very good.
Very nice. Thank you, much appreciated.
But I think we should take it up. I think this is
a
very entrepreneurial activity which nobody has attempted.
We're working on together.
And I think we should take it up. Because,
I think we need to.
See, even if it doesn't work, it's okay. You will learn a lot of lessons.
Absolutely, I completely believe.
Because
everything need not work.
Exactly.
And a path will
follow. My feeling is it will work. You may have to make some course corrections, but I think it will work. And we need this, see, because, I buy all these things, like, I used to buy that during COVID time, oxygen. That gave some numbers, it was not a study.
I'm very satisfied. I have 3 oximeters at home, just in case 3 of us have.
I think it's same reading. That is cross-validation.
No, same reading, but when you go to the hospital, it's a different reading.
I think, for example, the blood pressure measuring devices are huge concern. Because every time you, especially someone mentioned screening, right? The moment you do this in the community and you go to the doctor, they say, which device did you use? Oh, that's rubbish. Now let me again.
How do we
question? It questions the interventions of that.
Exactly, for diabetes, the random blood sugar. And for some reason, I was in the hospital, so they did this and they did biochemistry. They took blood. And in biochemistry, difference between that was 93 and in biochemistry it was 72. So that kind of, which one, and I asked him, how can I do? He said biochemistry.